It goes back to about 1960 or so, or 59 even. I first heard the name Korzybski at some kind of a family party where a young engineer from Purdue, who was a Baltimorean friend of ours, who was a friend, particularly my twin brother, Eddie, at Loyola College. I said something at this gathering, and he said, "Oh yeah, Korzybski." Well, I didn't realize that I had said something that was reflecting Korzybski's views, because I'd never heard of Korzybski at that point. And about a year later, I was at a shore party with then Monsignor Javolsky, who was at Holy Rosary Church, where I partly grew up. And he was putting out a parish newspaper. It was very sophisticated for a local parish, although it was a very big parish and all that. And he had been running a column in there, which was written then by Mira Savadin, who's lived near us up on Gulf Street. And she, while we were at a shore party, Javolsky and I, a bunch of other people, and we were drinking beer and chatting. And what had happened was that Miss Savadin, who had done about 6 or so of these articles on notable Poles, which Javolsky, the Monsignor, was publishing in his parish newspaper, because he wanted the young people of the parish in particular to have a kind of a ration of Polish culture, knowledge about their Polish background, contributions that Poles have made to world civilization. Well, she had run out of gas apparently, and she wanted out. So Javolsky asked me if I would take over. So I did. And I did a few articles, Malinowski, Polish mathematics, stuff like that. And then, having had that clue about Korzybski, I decided, well, I was thinking about what can the next article be about. So I said, well, I think I'll do one on Korzybski. So I proceeded to read about 25 books, including Science and Sanity. But mostly I was at that early stage influenced by Hayakawa's book, Language and Thought and Action, which is a kind of a semi-popular introduction of Korzybski, concentrating on, yeah, I know about that, concentrating on English and composition and communication, stuff like that, but not doing much of the scientific background. And Russell Myers, who was a famous neurosurgeon and neurologist, etc., a famous teacher of neuroscience, physiology, psychology, all kinds of stuff. I read some of his stuff, and on the basis of primarily those 2 books, I wrote my article for the Rosarian for Holy Rosary Parish newspaper.
Located.
So that's how I got
located. Where's Holy Rosary located?
It's on Chester Street, between Bank and Eastern Avenue, Bank Street and Eastern Avenue. It's a very large complex. It's a huge Romanesque church. I think completed in about 1927, just about the time that I was born, which was 1928. And it was really came to be one of the wealthiest parishes in the Baltimore Archdiocese. So much so that, as I've heard, the archbishops of Baltimore were constantly asking for loans from Holy Rosary to help out apparently other parishes that were doing as well. We used to have a joke. I may have said it in the earlier film that we made, video. This married couple, young married couple, are having a discussion on Saturday night because Holy Rosary was famous for being able to raise a lot of money. Monsignor Vahoviak, who was the master at that. And the joke was that this couple is talking on Saturday night. They say, well, shall we buy a house or go to Holy Rosary for Mass tomorrow? That was one of our, we had a lot of neighborhood-related jokes in those days, and that was one of the best ones.
Now, after you wrote that article, and you got to become familiar with Korzybski through his writings, what spurred your interest in further exploring Korzybski?
Well, what I read, especially when I started reading Science and Sanity, I was very struck. I mean, I've read, sometimes people accuse me of going for Korzybski just because I'm of Polish descent. And there's something to that. But that isn't the reason I have devoted my life, basically, to understanding Korzybski and promulgating it to people at large through my writings and teaching. I was so struck by him once I got what I call the neurolinguistic point, and that is the point that language is produced by brain, and in a reciprocal feedback way, language structures brain. Once I got that point, which is very clearly made in the introduction to the second edition of Science and Sanity, I said, quoting Ray Barone's father, holy crap. If this guy is right, almost everybody I've read so far is wrong, including Thomas Aquinas and Kant and a whole bunch of people. This recognition that the human brain produces everything that we talk about, and that having done that, that production further restructures the human brain. That is something that had never appeared before in philosophy, in the West or East. So that's what hooked me, and that was in about probably about 1962 or 3. And as I went along, I decided, God, this guy is so terrifically important. I have to write a biography of him. And I initially intended to write a biography for young people, which is now matured to the level where I'm going to write a biography, and write a book for young thinkers, in quotes, young evaluators, called Brains Are Us. And I'm even going to interrupt some of my work with Korzybski's biography, which I'm working on now, to produce this, because it'll be, I'm going to do it as popularly but as soundly as I can, so that it can be accessible to young readers at the middle school level, something like that. So I'd written a review of a book by a fellow named Joseph Witfall in Detroit, who owned a company called Endurance Press. I really feel much more comfortable looking at you than the damn camera. So you tell your father to take a rest. So I wrote this review, which it was published in the Rosarian, by the way, in Father Jaworski's, or Monsignor Jaworski's parish newspaper. Can you imagine that? A book, basically a sociological text about the Poles in America, a review of that book published by a kid from Fells Point in the Holy Rosary Parish newspaper called the Rosarian, of all things. I mean, this is good stuff. So anyway, so I wrote to, having published that review, and then Witfall, the owner of Endurance Press, used quotations from the review in publicizing his own book in Detroit. So, based on that, I wrote to him and suggested that I write. He had a series of books for young people, and I suggested that I would write a biography of Korzybski, and he was very interested. But I being very naive at the time, not an established author, suggested that he should give me some money to support this effort. Well, of course, publishers don't work that way with unknown writers by any means. So that never happened. But the notion of writing a biography of Korzybski has persisted. And early on, I read in Korzybski, he said, well, no one can write my biography who does not know my work. In fact, he also said, my life is my work. Don't waste your time going around the world and talking to people and getting petty details. The work is my life. Well, I took that seriously, so that's why at the age of 75, I have just started the actual writing of the biography, while my son Victor continues to do research at Columbia University at the Korzybski archive there. So that's how it all got started.
And then after you wrote that article, how did you get involved with the Institute?
How did I get what?
How did you get involved with the Institute? Who did you call?
Well, in 1965, I wrote a letter to M. Kendig, Marjorie Mercer Kendig, but she went by M. Kendig, or just most often just plain Kendig. A remarkable woman, kind of a Katharine Hepburn type, but a very, very important scholar. She had been the director of the Barstow School for Girls in Kansas City. I don't remember at the moment it was Kansas City, Kansas, or Missouri, but they're pretty close together, over a bridge, you know. And she was at Columbia where she got a master's, and she heard about Korzybski's book, Science and Sanity, and on the train, and of course in those days, this was 1930, probably early 1934, shortly after Science and Sanity was published, she read that book complete on the train from New York to Kansas City. I don't tell you what kind of girl she was. So she invited Korzybski to come to Barstow to train her staff so that they could better teach the girls at the school. And they were associated as about 2 years or so. What? Oh, you woman talk faster?
No, but
Well,
Bob, what I wanted you to focus on is we're going to talk about Korzybski later. Your involvement, you called Kendig, and then how did you get
yeah, well,
involved?
I'm getting to
Oh,
that.
okay.
That's
How did
what-
how did you get involved with the
But
institute?
let's hold off for just a minute. I'll have a little sip of vodka, and then maybe I'll speak more quickly. Yeah. Not necessarily more coherently, but more quickly, to honor your production values. Ah. Now this is not just touching my nose, this is wiping moisture. So anyway, Kendig had Korzybski at Barstow. He did some work there with her staff. Then in 1938, she became a close associate of his. In 1938, they jointly set up the Institute of General Semantics in Chicago, 1938. After Korzybski's death in 1950, she took over as director of the Institute. She had just established the General Semantics Bulletin, which is still functioning and is up to volume 70 at this point. Very important journal and long-lasting. A lot of journals of that kind go for maybe 2 or 3 years, and because of money mainly, they collapse. But she was able to maintain it, and Charlotte Reed, who was her assistant, and I, and others have kept it going at a very high level, I think. Anyway, so that's who Kendig was. So in 1965, I had reached the point, because of my studies, that I was already using general semantics in my teaching, and I taught a whole lot of places. In 1965, I wrote to Kendig saying that I wanted to write this biography of Korzybski, and I would like to come to the Institute to meet her, and so forth. Well, she passed me off to Charlotte Reed, who was Korzybski's executive secretary from 1939 to 1950 when he died. She was also his editorial assistant and gadfly, very important person in Korzybski's work. So Charlotte Reed wrote to me and invited me to come to her place in Manhattan. It was Columbia University housing, her husband being a professor of English at Columbia University at the time. A world-famous linguist, the guy who established the origin of OK, among other things. Very prolific and a great scholar. So she invited me to her first, December 1965. And I went there, and we met. She gave me some wine and cheese, etc. We had a lovely time. Alan Walker Reed, famous linguist, at one point came in to, as he admitted later, examine the specimen. And he spent about 10 minutes, we were chatting, and then he went back to his lair, where he did his linguistic stuff. It was piled high to the ceiling with 3x5 cards. This is at 39 Claremont Avenue in Manhattan, in Morningside Heights, just about a block down from Broadway, where the main Columbia campus was located. So from that point on, Charlotte Reed was, I guess that we could say she was pleased by me. I don't know why? So uh, she invited me to take a weekend seminar the next spring. After I explained to her why I was there and what I wanted to do, and she said, "Well, I think you should." This was a scholarship kind of arrangement. Take this seminar in the spring in New York, and then in 1966, she invited me to take the 2 week. It was then a 2 week seminar at Bard College in New York, Poughkeepsie, north of Poughkeepsie, and so that's really how I got into it in a big way. Well, in that very seminar, I made some remarks from the floor about Thomas Aquinas and scholastic philosophy as being the kind of a key Aristotelian system, or point of view, anyway. Uh, and I made the point that Thomas Aquinas baptized Aristotle. And Korzybski, of course, was plugging what he calls a non-Aristotelian system. And so my remarks were treated with great interest. So much so that I was asked to give a 15-minute statement within Dr. Ken Johnson's session, which he wasn't very happy about, to talk about scholasticism and Aristotelianism and Thomas Aquinas and so forth. Well, that went so well that the people in the seminar were starting a movement to say, hey, give Pula more time to talk. Well, of course, the people who were on the staff didn't want to give up their time to this snot-nose who came out of the blue and started talking about Thomas Aquinas. So we didn't do any more that year. But the next year, Dr. Johnson, who was a professor of, he was a chemist initially, and then a science writer, but then he wound up in communications, and he taught general semantics at University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, I think. And so the next summer, for some reason at the university, he couldn't make it as a staff member to the seminar, so I was asked to fill in for him. And that's when I started being on the seminar staffs. And by in the early 70s, I had become the lead lecturer for stressing the Korzybski formulations.
Now, where are you with regards to the biography?
Well, I've done much research in Poland and visiting places that are related to Korzybski. His estate, well, former estate, because it's gone through several hands since the early 20th century. And I've researched at the University of Warsaw, et cetera. A lot of research at Columbia. So I'm about, I think I would say about halfway through what I need to go through at Columbia. I still have to go to Johns Hopkins, where Korzybski had many close associations and was often visiting there. And but most of that stuff I've turned over to my son Victor. I've showed him the ropes. He's registered as a researcher at Columbia, so he has a card. He can get into the library and look at the stuff. And so I have started writing the text, because I have all that I need for roughly the first half of Korzybski's life, uh, namely the Polish half. What Victor is finishing up when he makes his trips to New York is going through the rest of the Korzybski archives, which cover the part that he's working on, covers from I would say 1924 to 1950, when Korzybski died. So I've started the writing, and Victor's job is to complete the Scott level research, so that when I finish with the Polish half of Korzybski's life, he will have provided me with what I need for the rest of his life here in America, which started in December 1915.